Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third chapter in our book in COM 466, Persuasion and Social Movements. If you've been able to keep up with the readings, that's fantastic. If you're one of those people that put off reading until later in the semester, I just want you to know that you're not so far behind yet that it's going to be a problem for you. So once you are settled in and can start reading, the better off you're going to be, because that means my lectures will make more sense to you, and we certainly want that to happen. So in this class, we do a lot of reading of short chapters, but some of them, like this one, chapter 3, the functions of persuasive movements, social movements, are extremely detailed, and they go into sometimes excruciating detail about things, and you might wonder, is this something I really need to know? And the short answer to the question is yes, and here's why. So many people have misunderstood social movements for so long, asking how you get a massive group of people to behave in a certain way for the purpose of social change is incredibly complex. It's not like we have a silver bullet message that works for all social movements or even for one. It is an interconnected web of messaging and messaging platforms. And those have changed over time in the sense that now, instead of, using a lot of protests in person, we might see those move online. And instead of watching a documentary, we might listen to a podcast. So the medium of the messages have changed. But the fact of the matter is that the messages, those are always different. They are dependent on the context, they're dependent on the movement, and they're dependent on what it is we're trying to get out of one part of the audience or another. So in chapter 3, it pretty much gives you a step-by-step analysis of what social movements have to do in order for them to be successful. And so in that sense, this is a very practical application chapter, and that's the good news. They call it the functions of social movements, and I don't understand that term, but in here they say it a little bit differently, which is that it's what social movements have to do in order for them to be successful. And in that sense, this makes a heck of a lot more sense once I understand that. Now, I'm going to break these down, and what I'd like to do is obviously not read the book to you, because I never want to do that, but I will actually take this and I will demonstrate all of these pieces to you as I see them in the social movement I've told you I run, that eventually became a nonprofit. The reason why I use this one is because hopefully you understand that I've got very real experience in this subject matter, and utilizing these ideas from this book actually in order to achieve the goals that I've been able to achieve so far, and hopefully will continue to have success with. I was actually at a political function in Forsyth, Missouri. When was it? It was like last Sunday? Yeah, it was a week ago, last Saturday, something like that. And I was sitting there talking to a few people after most of the crowd had gone home. I'm managing this particular campaign, so I was just sitting around shooting a breeze with people, and there were these community members there who said, "Oh, you're from Nixa?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Oh, what is the name of that movement up there? Like the book banners?" And I thought they meant the book banners. And so I was naming off all these different Facebook groups that the people who want to ban books, and the people who don't want certain words said in the high schools and so on. I was coming up with their names, and she's like, no. She goes, "What is that name?" And one of my students happened to be with me, actually, one of my political comm students, and they said, "Don't you think she's talking about U-turn?" And I was like, "Oh, that's awkward." And she goes, "Oh yeah, that's it, U-turn in education." And I went, "Hi, I'm the president." Now, that is probably the best symptom or quality or message that I can get, the feedback to tell me that the movement is working. In order to know if your movement is reaching people, it's when somebody completely out of the blue out of context comes to you and says, hey, I know about this organization that might, help or that you might identify with, and it's mine. So I was pretty pleased with that, because I like to hear that our message is getting out, and it certainly is. Especially since this person thought that I would garner some extra education or help by going to my own movement. That is, like I said, the highest compliment you can get. So how is it that you achieve that? And to be honest with you, U-Turn did it very quickly. In under a year, we got together, organized, and then filed to be a 501c3 nonprofit organization. That is incredibly quick. And I would not actually tend to believe that most social movements function that quickly. I mean, they just can't. It's a much longer process than that. So why was U-Turn able to function differently? Because it was based in a localized area on a specific issue. And then once we were together and doing our thing, people started to say, hey, there's these other parts of things that we could be doing. Other projects and other support that we can offer to the community for public education. And that was very, very exciting. And that's why ultimately we had to get 501c3 status, which for those of you who don't know, means that not only are you a nonprofit, but you are tax exempt, and you could collect donations and people can write them off on their taxes if they want to at the end of the year. So pretty exciting that it moved as quickly as it did. I would never anticipate a movement would go that quickly. And also remember that we are based in Nixa, and for the most part are known in the Nixa, Springfield, Ozark area. We don't really go much further than that. I think some up in Willard, maybe one or two in Republic. But, for the most part, we are still very, very local. So it's not like we're talking about success on the national level. There are certainly some strides made there, but that takes years. So let's talk about what these supposed functions are. And I apologize because I'm going to have to put my glasses on, and we're probably going to have some reflection in the glass here in the camera. I apologize. But I can't see without them, at least not the reading part. So using my handy dandy phone with my book on it, because, the older you get, the smaller you should make your reading materials. So in this chapter, they talk about, like I said, these persuasive functions, or the things that social movements need to do, the types of messages that they need to share in order for them to be successful. And I believe there are 6. There's transforming perceptions of reality, which is not as hard as it sounds. Altering self-perceptions of protesters, not as hard as it sounds. Legitimizing the social movement. That will depend on the context, on how hard that is. Prescribing courses of action. Now, this is where you might expand or might need to draw your movement back a little bit. We'll talk about that. And sustaining the social movement, which is probably the hardest of these 6. Okay. So let's start with the transforming perceptions of social reality. Now, most of you probably already know that social reality is that which we share, the reality that we share. So it's not the reality that was in my dreamscape last night. It's not the reality of being in a home with our families, or being on vacation or something like that. But it actually has to do with perceptions of reality that we share with the general public, that sort of cultural phenomena and frame of reference that we might have, that we can all access, and therefore that we can all sort of utilize to create a reality that we want to share. Now, you might be thinking that sounds like, Star Trek-y, futuristic, crazy stuff, but it's not what you think. It is really just about getting people to understand where you're at now and what it is about the past that your movement wants to change, and what needs to be done in order for those things to change. And you need people to agree that there is, in fact, something that needs to change, that there is a way to do it, and that identifying with your movement is going to help that, and that that will ultimately be successful in the future. So like I said, we're going to use U-turn in education. Now, your book breaks this down into three different types of reality that you have to change: perceptions of the past, perceptions of the present, and perceptions of the future. Now, this is really easy to give you examples for. So one of the things, the main thing that U-turn in education tries to do is to promote and support public education. That means the teachers, that means the buildings, that means running for school board, that means, yes, fighting for against book challenges to keep all materials in the library. That includes fighting for diversity in education and for the education of special needs students, for example, and students who are different or perceived as different in societies such as the LGBTQIA community, right? So it's about protecting minorities in a lot of ways to make sure that everyone has access to every educational opportunity that can be available to them. All right, so in the past, people have valued that. They have valued public education. They have valued having the freedom of intellect. They have valued having scientific material as well as fictional material available to students in order for them to expand their horizons and to have a diverse learning experience. Books literally are a learning experience. So that's how we sort of look at it. What's unfortunate is that the people I was working with from the outset, we assumed that everyone was still on that same train of thought, that the general public appreciated public education in the way that it was done, and that we could rely on that. The fact of the matter is that we started to realize when there were book challenges, when there were people talking about critical race theory and not even knowing what they're talking about, or talking about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion in education, and not even knowing what that impacts or what that means, that we started to realize that not everybody values education the same way that we do. So right off the bat, we have to start establishing or reestablishing those thoughts from the past that a public education is important to the success of our children and of our communities, right? So we had to start there. Talk about backpedaling quite a bit. The first public school was in Boston in 1635. It was established. That's how long it's. Our public education system is based on ideas that are older than our own country. Okay, so it seems like that would be something that we'd want to value. I mean, if not for the purpose of tradition and always doing it, which is never a justification to keep doing something, by the way, but the fact that it has been shown to lead to success of people in their later lives, that seemed like a pretty done thing for me. But no, we had to go back and recreate that perception of reality. We had to go back and change people's minds back. Now, were we successful with that? Not really. But with some people, of course we were, but with others, not so much. But we did get other things done. So just because we can't change perceptions of the past does not mean that we can't change perceptions of the present or future. Let me tell you how I mean that. So perceptions in the present tense is really about, is there action that needs to be taken? And if so, what is that action? And what should it look like? What values should we have? One of the things that's pretty scary about studying social movements is that it's about identity. At its core, people will join social movements so that they can say they belong to that movement. I remember when I was much younger, I think I was in high school, junior or senior, when I was allowed to join the ACLU. I totally was a card-carrying member of the ACLU, and I was called everything from a communist to a hippie, all sorts of words that back in the 80s were really, truly offensive. But I was called all of these words because I carried a card membership of the ACLU. But it was part of my identity as a human being at the time. Like, if you ask me, who are you? What defines you? Well, one of the things that defines us is what groups and organizations we belong to, right? Some people say their church, or some people talk about their ethnic heritage, right? Or some people might talk about where they went to high school. If you're from St. Louis, that's what you talk about, right? What is it that identifies you? What makes you identifiable? And what can people share with you in identity? So in the present tense, what we needed to do was prove to people, and we're still working on this, by the way, is show them a constructed reality where U-Turn in education is not just about book bans. It's not just about fighting with the community. It's about doing what's best for our students. So there's not a lot of people out there who at the get-go believe that that's what U-Turn was about. They thought we were just going to try to stop book bans from happening and then we would go away quietly. And that's not what happened, probably to their great disdain. So what we need to do is change minds in the present, that the track that we're on right now is leading us to where we want to be. And that means changing perceptions of the future. I'm not really sure what the alternative to our future is, but when I think about a future without public education, I'll tell you what I think of. I think of going back to about the 1920s and 1930s when we were sending children into coal mines or into wells to do work or to work on the farms because they weren't educated enough to do anything else. And that was a very dangerous life for any child. And a lot of our children had them. I was very lucky. My grandfather was born in 1913. He died in 2013. And I had him around for a very long time, which was great. He didn't even marry until he was in his 30s. And after he came back from being in the Navy for 4 months, I think it was, don't ask, his boat was torpedoed. But what was it that he saw happen? Well, he was considered to be rich and well off because he was allowed to take a horse to school. And also because my great-grandparents could afford to let one of their sons go to school instead of working on the farm. Now, my grandfather also had a hay allergy. Working on the farm wasn't really his cup of tea. It was very difficult for him. So that was another reason why he went to school and was educated. But because he was educated, he did go into skilled labor and therefore was able to make a life off of the farm, move to a different part of the state, and raise his family, close to relatives, but not on the same piece of property. In other words, there was growth and there was progression. And ultimately, my mom met my father. She did 2 years of college. My father became a lawyer. And so now all 4 of his kids, my siblings and I, all have a minimum of 2 college degrees. I have 3. I've got my what do you call it, bachelor's, my master's, and my PhD. My sister has her bachelor's and her master's. My brother John has 2 bachelor's degrees, and my brother Patrick has a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. So we all went into higher education. We were all highly educated, and that helped us be differently successful than my grandfather. Now, do I think it's bad that we have, children who work on farms and whatnot? No, of course, that's fantastic. We need that. But we don't need them foregoing public education in order to do it. That's why public education was created in the first place, was to put as many people on the same level to start with as we could. Now, there have been a lot of things that have changed that over the past. But one thing it doesn't change is predictions about the future, that students will be more successful in the future if they have a high school diploma, right? After that, honestly, I'll be honest with you, not everybody should go to college, right? We need skilled workers, skilled laborers, carpenters and pipe fitters and all of those things. We need those. So none of my children went to college, believe it or not. They all chose different paths, and that's fine. They're still extremely successful people because they had that education they were supposed to start off with. It's supposed to start off with in the recent past that we've believed in. So changing people's perception about the future, that if we continue to cut educational experiences from children, not give them diverse experiences, that they will not be successful in the future. And a lot of people don't see that right now. And so it's our job, at least in Nixa, to get people to understand that. So we're recreating, or we're envisioning a future that's different from what probably most people think of, at least based on their arguments. From what I can tell, people don't believe that a public education is good anymore. I mean, we've got school choice bills all over the country. Right here in our state, right here in the city of Springfield, you have someone who introduced legislation to the state of Missouri to allow for absolute school choice. And that might sound to you like, oh, I mean, well, that's not so bad. What's wrong with school choice? And that's not a topic of conversation for today. But the person who suggested to the state that we should adopt, school choice, also happens to be the person who created a home curriculum for people to teach their students. And so he sells these things, this curriculum, for millions. So if there's private institutions and there's a lot more homeschooling going on, he benefits financially greatly from that. I doubt that's a surprise to anybody, but to me, it was pretty shocking when I found out that not only was that person in our state, but that person was in our city. That's pretty frustrating. It's what are we working towards then? Are we working for the students, or are we working for our own monetary gain? That's the question that comes up to me. So that's how we sort of transform perceptions of the past, the present, and the future to make them in line with the movement that we're starting, the way we want people to identify. And that leads to the second thing, which is altering self-perceptions of the protesters. That is, the people who are going to belong to your movement. How do we actually, I lost my place here. How do we actually get them to want to identify with the movement, right? And that is extremely difficult. How do you get people to understand that what they really believe in is your cause? That they really do identify with your cause. I've had conversations with people in the community about, forget book bans. Like, let's just forget those. About the fact that students in Nixa always had a reputation for having a great education. We are a blue ribbon school. We've got several of them, and we're in a Gold Star school district, top 6 in the state, which Missouri's not that high up, guys, so I'm not really sure how much of a bragging point that is. But hey, you know what? It's better than the rest of the 94% of the state or whatever. So that's a good thing. But one of the reasons why it's been so good, and this is what people are arguing about right now, one of the reasons it's been so good and successful is because of that diversity in education that was offered, because of a library in the high school that was curated by someone who has master's degrees, not just in library science, but also in secondary education. That they had experiences that went outside of the classroom makes it an excellent education. And people just don't believe that anymore. I am looking at a future where I see Nixa just plummeting down in educational value and quality, whereas others see that if we don't do something drastic to change the way it is now, that it will decrease in quality. Well, that's my job, is as part of the movement, is to convince people that what they really do want is their children to be educated well enough to be successful when they get out of high school. They do want that. And everybody will tell you that. They're like, well, I want my student to be educated, to get a job and make a good living, make a better living perhaps than I did. But I don't want them taught this, this, and this. And what we're trying to do is open people up to the idea that if you want people to be educated, that you have to consider all educational opportunities. You can't just pick and choose which ones you want. So altering basically the identity or the way that people identify as part of your movement is key. Now, I'll let you read about perceptions of victimage, of self-esteem, of self-identity, and social status. These are just, they break them down a little bit more than I just did. The next one, legitimizing the social movement. Now, this is actually really, really important for a movement to do. Legitimizing the social movement means that you have a reason for your movement to be in existence, that people should join it for a reason. That sounds simple. It somewhat is, but I have had people come up to me. Let's see, we started this movement in 2022. So we are about to go on 2 years old, I think. Oh, actually this month we're 2 years old. So people have asked me things. I mean, despite the experience I had last Saturday, people have asked me, why are you guys still doing this? Why are you still making a mess out of things? Why are you still fighting? Well, we've got other things that we're working on. For example, transparency from the school board would be one. Teacher pay is another. Reestablishing our library and the standards for our students' education. Looking at our MAPS testing and saying, why don't we get more state funding if we're so good at what we do? What is it that we're not seeing that we could be doing better? Those sorts of things that we still want to look at and we still think are important, that some people might think, well, you solved that problem, so why are you still here? So when we talk about, when we talk about legitimizing the movement by confirming and maintaining legitimacy, that means that we have a reason to be around. When we talk about legitimacy through coactive strategies, that means more than one thing. As I just talked about, we're not just about book bans and fighting book bans. We're a lot more than that, and we need strategies for that. And then also, you need to work with people in society in order to make that work. Now, who are we coactive with? I would say we're coactive with the school board. We're coactive with the Nixa Teachers Association. So we are, in fact, coactive in several different ways, with several different groups and organizations. We were coactive with 2 universities, one in Ohio and one in Georgia this past summer, this past fall when we did a public education course on the book Mouse. So we work with different people. And then legitimacy through confrontational strategies. That is to say, obviously you're not working with people all the time. If you were, you wouldn't need a movement. So there's got to be some confrontation, some opposition, and you have to outline who, what, and where you are disagreeing, where you have clash, where you need to be, where you need to confront a difference and therefore be extremely, sometimes extremely confrontational. Okay. So those are, I'll let you read more about those, but legitimizing the social movement is a constant process. You're doing it all the time. It never stops being. You have to justify the movement all the time. I hear people ask me to justify the civil rights movement these days. They're like, really? You need that? Okay. More than willing to do it. Then the book talks about prescribing courses of action. Okay, so what, who, and how is action going to be taken? And these can be defined very narrowly. They could be defined very broadly. But the more narrow and the more direct action you have, it sort of follows Monroe's motivated sequence. I don't know if you guys studied that in COM 115 or not, but Monroe's motivated sequence basically says, identify a problem and let people know about it. Establish that problem as a big, bad, urgent problem. Tell them what the world will look like if you solve that problem. Give them the tiniest thing to do for that success. And then you will be able to persuade your audience. So they need a teeny tiny action that will solve a huge problem. That's always true. And so when you read this part of the chapter, you're basically reading about what you need to do to satisfy that for your public. Next up, we have mobilizing for action. This is the part that's hard. A lot of times I can get people to sign on to the organization, right? I'm behind you. I identify with you 100%. But if I ask them to go to a school board meeting or go to a library board meeting or to show up for a U-turn meeting even, that is where things get really hard and you have a lot of fall off. The truth of the matter is that I probably have about 150 people in the organization who identify as part of the organization. And far fewer than 15 of those are involved. I would have to say that maybe it's like 10 or 12 of us. So we don't quite have 10% participation. And you normally won't. In a social movement, it's about getting names behind you for petitions to your school board, to your city council, to your government, to whatever. And so names are important, but when it comes to calling for action, how do you motivate people to act? How do you mobilize a large group to act? So one of the first things that you have to do is organize the discontented. So I need to tell these people that they're discontent first and explain to them why. And then I need to get them together who are willing to know what steps we should take in lockstep together, what this mass movement can do, right? And organizing a group of people can sometimes be like, honestly, herding cats, the truth is. And I've herded cats before, so I think I know. Sometimes possible, but very, very difficult to do, okay? Energizing the discontented. How do you energize the discontented? You have to convince them that something can be done. You have to convince them that what can be done is something that we can do, because if you're not going to be successful, what's the point? And you need to insist that they understand that their actions matter, that one person's actions in this large group actually matter, because it's about collective action, right? So we get people to do different things. When it all comes together, we have greater success. Synergy, right? Pressuring the opposition. This one's easy. It's easy to trash talk people, but that's not usually what you want to do. Instead, it's about literally getting them to state their positions so that your argument against them can be stronger, okay? And then getting sympathy and legitimacy for your movement. So getting people to understand, again, that the movement needs to exist, that legitimacy, all right? The next thing, and I'm going to say, did I say there were 6 things and there's only 5? I think I messed that up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Nope, 6. Okay. The last one, and I'm going to say this is the hardest, is maintaining or sustaining your social movement, keeping it going, even through the slow times, even through the times when you have successes, getting people to maintain their enthusiasm for it. Your book talks about justifying setbacks or delays that you have, maintaining the viability of the movement, and maintaining visibility of the movement. And sometimes it's that last one that's all you need, is that you need people to still acknowledge that you are a thing and that you are important, okay? Sometimes that's the most you're going to get. But what you really need to be able to do is to say that the movement is still necessary, and that even if we haven't won everything, that the ground we have gained is important. So let me tell you how that plays out for U-turn. during the holiday season, nobody wanted to do anything. And there were no library board meetings. There were no school board meetings. There were no city council meetings, right? So we weren't doing a whole heck of a lot. And some people said in the group, oh no, we're not doing anything. We're going to lose momentum. Like, that's probably generally true, just on the whole, with anything. But the truth of the matter is that nobody was paying attention at that point in time. And during the holiday season, however you define that, do you really want to be hearing about book challenges? The kids are out of school. Nobody wants to go out in the weather. So, I'm justifying the setback, if you want to view it that way, right? Saying that we still need to keep working. And I did do that. I did that with my my board. Got us all together on Skype or on Signal. No, where was it? Zoom. Got us all together on Zoom and said, okay, we need to not lose momentum once everybody comes back from being out of school in January. We need to get back to the school board meetings and get back to the library board meetings once they kick up. Maintaining the viability of the movement, it means, yes, we can keep doing what we're doing. One of the things that happened last year was 2 of us ran for school board last year, and we both lost. Spectacularly lost, by the way. But I'm running again this year. Why? Why do we keep doing that? The answer is very simple. If you look at the past year, we have gotten the school board to change some of its policies. We've gotten them to be more transparent. We have gotten some of the book challenges revisited. So we have achieved some goals. There have been major setbacks, but we gained ground. So is the movement still viable? Yeah, I want to run for school board again. I'm not going to win, and that's okay because I want to make sure we're still able to make change happen, right? To move the needle, so to speak. And some people don't want to accept that for a movement. They're just like, oh, if you don't achieve every single goal you set out to achieve in this particular period of time, then you're never going to be able to be successful. That is just not true. Social movements at their very core are evolutionary, not revolutionary. I know that is a controversial thing to say because social movements are always tied to revolutionary ways of thinking. But if you think about them evolutionarily, I don't know that that's a word, but if you think of them as an ever-evolving entity, then you adapt and change to the conditions that you're working in. And let's say, for example, that some of the stuff, hey, we were successful with some of the stuff. Do you just give up at that point? Or do you say, hey, look, we've got more stuff to do? So the viability of the movement is often directly related to the visibility of the movement. That people still know that you're around, that people still know, the public knows that you're still doing the things that need to be done. So hopefully this chapter right here outlines for you almost step by step how you get a movement moving. And it's not an easy process. You have to think on multiple levels. Like people say to me all the time, by the way, I'm terrible at chess. I just want to make that very clear. My father tried to teach me from the time I was about 6. I'm horrible. Okay. Like I can lose in 12 moves. It's horrible. But sometimes people say you're playing 3D chess while they're playing checkers. That idea of operating on multiple levels, of being able to see all of the layers that are going on with your movement is key. And so when we get to the leadership chapter about leadership in social movements, different kinds of leadership, one of the things I hope I remember to talk about is that skill of being able to see on multiple levels how your movement is doing when you consider what needs to change and what messages need to be going out to the public. All right, everybody, hopefully that explains chapter 3 pretty well. You still need to read it in order to truly understand everything I just said, but hopefully this gives you some practical application. By the way, somebody did ask how they could see the U-Turn movement, if you want to follow it along. And we do have a Facebook page. We do have a Twitter account. We're not very good with those because we're Gen Xers. We also have a website, and the website is probably the best place to see what we've done and what we plan to be doing in the future. That website is www.uturnineducation, all one word, uturnineducation.org. So www.uturnineducation.org. That's UTURNINEDUCATION. And if you want to go look at it, you can. There's certainly, you don't need to for the purposes of this course or anything else. Hopefully that answers everybody's questions so far. I haven't looked at the discussion board to see if there's any questions up there, but I will. And also to grade. So I hope you all have a fantastic week. And if you need anything, you'll let me know. Talk to you soon.